John Scott. They say that he killed the guy the other day. First he knocked him out, then he came back. I don't know whether it was because he had the urge to smoke or what it was. He came back and slit his throat and took his cigarettes. We have choices. Life comes with choices. God gave us free will. So of course, I wrote something about what happened to me years ago where I made choices. It's called At the Threshold of Good, Bad, Yes, and No. Life is our choice to do or not to. And yes, I'm an aunt of 3 killed nephews, brutally killed in selfishness, total selfishness. We are all just a second away from bad and wrong. I remember when I was out in the world struggling to be, I was robbed and beaten about the head in a robbery attempt. He walked in as if he wanted to buy some drugs that I sold, and he pulled a gun. I think he would have killed me for those drugs if I hadn't gave him what he came for. I reached in my pocket, got the drugs out, and gave him what I wanted him to have. He was satisfied and left. I was hurt bad, but I also knew it was partly my fault because I was selling drugs. About 3 weeks later, a call came on a Sunday and said that the guy who robbed me was at this place where we would go to sell our drugs, to shoot our drugs on the other side of town. I hopped in the car and went where he was. My crazy friend met me there and wanted to kill this guy bad, but waited for me. This guy who worked with me selling drugs, this guy had no patience, no peace in his life. Killing somebody was how he got his kicks. Hurting women, beating them up was how he got his kicks. So when I got there, my friend, I'm not going to call his name, I don't even know whether he's still alive or not. He met me at the door and walked in front of me to where this guy called Green Eyes was. And I stood there and I looked at him. Now, Green Eyes was less than who he was that day when he bust me in my head, knocked me to the ground, and demanded my drugs. The figure of the man that I saw that day during the robbery and what I saw this day that I was there, preferably my friend thought to kill him, was totally different. He was sitting in the chair and he was in a place that I had been many, many times, sick and ill because he didn't have drugs. And see, when you're sick and you're ill and don't have drugs, you don't want to be bothered with nobody. All you're thinking about is where to get it. And if you don't have no money, you're really in a bad shape. So I stood there, and I called his name, and he raised his head up. Place, I guess must have been about 13 people in there. Everybody ordering. Nobody cared about this man who everybody was scared of. Nobody cared that he was sitting there sick. So when I called his name, he raised his head and he looked up at me. And I asked him, I said, you had your shot today? He said, no. He says, I'm waiting for somebody to bring something, some kind of conversation he gave me. I said, how many bags do it take you to get yourself together? He said 3. Good ones. 4 or 5 if it's, just shaky. So I told my friend, who I'm not going to call his name, I said, look, give him 3 bags. I bought him a pair of brand new Works. I'll never forget it. Works is the needles they use. We call them Works. He looked up at me, Green Eyes did, and he, as if to say, you think I'm out of my mind, that I'm going to take these drugs from you? that I'm going to do these drugs. I know you're trying to kill me. You know, that was the look he had in his eye. So it was a girl sitting on another chair not too far from him. And she was sitting there, you know. She looked like she might have been halfway decent. And I asked her, I said, have you had your shot today? She said, well, I've had some. I'm not going to lie. She said, but I could use another bag. Get me right where I need to be. I reached down, picked up the bag, handed it to her. And I said, go ahead, do that. She did it. Didn't take her long. She had good veins. And she sat there and she nodded off, you know. Green eyes looked at her. Saw she was nodding. Saw she was enjoying them drugs. Of course, he wanted some then. I reached down, picked up 3 bags, handed it to him. I said, here, use them. Get yourself together. He sat there, picked up the brand new works, took them out of the paper, fixed up his stuff, used it, and he sat there. And it don't take long once you get that hit, you know. He sat there, and he nodded, he started to nod, his words were slurring. And at that moment, he was ready to die. That's right. He was ready. He was surrendering. He was there. He was nodding. And the drugs might have made him feel good, but he was in no position to even defend himself. So he just sat there, nodding, scratching, trying to tell me what he had to tell me. He never said, I'm ready to die, but you could tell he was ready. So my man, he looks at me, you know, and I look back at him. I said, come on, let's go. He looked strangely. He said, what? I said, yeah, come on, let's go. See, I made a choice that day. Whether to let my man shoot him for robbing me or walk away. Because believe me, within those few lessons, those few minutes, there were lessons learned. There were friendships made. There was and the lesson was how to treat people. So we walked on the left, and we saw him like 2 or 3 days after that. He was thanking us. Man, thank you for not killing me. Thank you for not killing me. And we became buddies. We became friends. He got himself together. And he stopped using because he knew he was totally out of control. And nobody was going to give him a bag or anything to sell. So he went and got himself cleaned up for about a month and came back out. And I was the first person he came to. We gave him a bag. We started working together. And he became just like a brother to me. It lasted about 3 years. 3 years of nothing but total friendship between us. Then another Sunday, the phone rang. And it was also about green eyes. To tell me he was dead, laying in an alley up on 11th and O Street, Northwest. I'll never forget it. I jumped in the car and got down there, and somebody had killed him, shot him a couple times, threw an old dirty mattress on top of him. All it was blood and guts. And he just laid there. I just looked at him. And from that day that he bust me in my head and knocked me to the floor, to that 3 years, to that Sunday, I felt so much love for him. He was just like a brother to me. And I hated that he was dead. Can you believe that? 3 years before that, I wished he was dead. 3 years after, through the learning process of life, I wished he wasn't dead. I missed him. Missed him for years because he was a sense of protection for me. Now see, I was in full addiction when this happened. I was on drugs too. A lot of people didn't even realize that, but I was on drugs too. And I made the choice through all of that confusion not to kill, not to be a part of somebody killing somebody. I almost had to drag my man out of that orange joint that day. But I made the choice. And we all have choices. We all have choices. To say yes or no to situations that happen around us. Now, I don't know what John Scott's reason was for knocking out a man, walking away, going into someone else's house, talking about what he had just did, coming back, and for a pack of cigarettes cutting his throat. I don't know why he did that. And I would not be the one to try to explain it. Because really and truly, I can't explain half the things I do today, or why I do them, or how I do them. But I do them. And there's lessons to be learned from that death. And I hope that John Scott heeds those messages. I hope when he sits in that cell, hopefully by himself at some time, in some type of confusive peace, that he thinks about what he did. Because he's going to have a long time to think. A long time to think. See, now when I think back on my life, when I was into drugs and out there in that confusion for 31 years, I am so glad. And I have to say to myself, thank you, Jesus, that God kept me. He kept me from being hurt, and he kept me from doing hurt. It's as simple as that. It's our choice, John. It's our choice. Thank you, Patricia Robbins.